معارف ایران، من شهریار افشار هستم، میزبان شما در پالیتیکس 365. امروز مجددا یکی از کارشناسای خیلی فعال در زمینه ایران و خاورمیانه به برنامه دعوت کردیم، آقای جورجیو کافیرو در واشنگتن دی سی. ایشون مدیر گالف استیت انالیتیکس هستن و به علاوه اون در جورج تاون یونیورسیتی تدریس میکنن و تو خیلی از شبکه‌های مختلف از پروگرام‌های مختلف دنیا CNN در خاورمیانه اظهار نظر کردن و واقعا نظرشون خیلی مهمه برای ما. پس ما مجددا ایشون رو دعوت کردیم که به ما کمک کنن واقعا یه ذره نقش ایران رو در خاورمیانه بررسی کنیم و مخصوصا با توجه به حوادثی که بین یا به اصطلاح نمیشه گفت جنگ، اما رد و بدل موشک‌ها بین ایران و اسرائیل و اثر اون به اصطلاح حمله هایی که جفت کشورها به هم دیگه کردن چی خواهد بود. بقیه برنامه با معذرت به انگلیسی خواهد بود. Giorgio, welcome back. So great to have you. So much has gone on in the Middle East. It seems like we could spend hours talking about any aspect of what's going on, and we may still not have a full understanding of all the complexities. It seems like obviously the growing loss of life in Gaza continues. The U.S. has pushed back on Israel. Obviously, the big news over the past few weeks was the exchange of missiles between Iran and Israel. Everyone thought, oh no, we're going to go into a third world war, and it kind of ended before it began without any significant, I believe, no loss of life other than maybe some bruised egos, if you can call it that, between all the 300 missiles that Iran sent. But, you know, everyone did say we passed the threshold. We went from a Cold War kind of exchange to a hot. Missiles have been exchanged from the home soils of these two countries. And is this a change in the Middle East? And should we expect a shift in policies and reactions among all the players around this table after that exchange? So give us your thought about that exchange and what you feel we're on the path to now.
Yeah, well, it's great to be back on your program. And, you know, the events of April 2024 were a very big deal. I think a good place to begin is on April 1, when the Israelis carried out an airstrike that razed an Iranian diplomatic facility in Damascus that killed a number of high-ranking Iranian military officials. And let's keep in mind that under international law, the embassies and consulates are the sovereign territory of the country that runs those diplomatic facilities. So even though that facility was in Damascus, it was technically an attack on Iranian soil, according to international law. And so Iran was under a tremendous amount of pressure to respond. And frankly, I was pretty surprised to see how the Iranians reacted to that attack in Damascus. What I thought, and what probably the majority of analysts thought, was that Iran would either attack Israeli interests in another country, or there would be an Iran-backed group, such as the Houthis in Yemen or Hezbollah in Lebanon, perhaps, that would do something against Israel. But the fact that Iran's military launched hundreds of missiles and drones at Israeli territory, it constituted an unprecedented counterattack that sort of resulted in the quote-unquote shadow war between Israel and Iran, giving way to, you know, direct state-to-state military confrontations. After the Iranian counterattack of April 13th and 14th, many people, certainly myself included, were extremely nervous about how Israel was going to respond. There was no way that Israel was going to let that go without a response. However, the Israeli response, at least so far, has only consisted of a very limited strike against military facilities in Isfahan. And as you rightly pointed out, the Iranian counterattack of April 13 and 14, it resulted in only one loss of life, obviously very tragic, but still that's a very low number given that there were hundreds of missiles and drones fired. And then to the best of my knowledge, or at least according to the Iranian officials, there was no loss of life when Israel carried out its counterattack on April 19. And it seemed very clear, given the way that Iranian authorities reacted to Israel's attack on April 19, that both sides wanted to avoid seeing the hostilities move upward on the escalation ladder. I think both Israel and Iran vested interests in avoiding an all-out war. And that was obviously a good thing from the standpoint of security of the entire Middle East, and by extension, global security, given how important the Middle East is to the rest of the world. So everyone can take some comfort in the fact that the two sides found an off-ramp and prevented these escalations from spiraling out of control. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that at a moment's notice, the hostilities could restart, and we could be again going back upwards on the escalation ladder. And there's no denying that because of Iran's unprecedented counterattack and then the Israeli response to that, there are now new rules of engagement in the Middle East that I think shows that the region is in a new era and the situation is more dangerous and unpredictable today.
Yeah. You know, I find fascinating in that exchange, I think I heard from your the beginning of your talk that really both leaders in Israel and Iran are responding to the hardliners and the pressures within. You know, so they had to do something. Iran had to do something to look semi-powerful, but they really didn't want to get into a war. So they, you know, and this was the big conspiracy theory that everyone heard about, that Iran knows Israel has an Iron Dome. They know the capabilities of that country. And the fact that they sent, you know, 300, you know, might as well been darts at that security facility, kind of made people believe they really didn't want to get into something. And in fact, their press release confirmed that after they launched, I think the words were, "We consider this matter concluded." I've never heard a press release during launch that says, "We're done. We don't want to fight anymore." And Israel, it seemed like they proved that they can land missiles on Iranian soil without a problem. And if they wanted to, they could have aimed those things at a much more damaging location, but they didn't. So they both kind of did the saber rattling, but then they both backed off, probably realizing what you said, worried that we're going to plunge, because they know Israel, if Israel gets into a full-on conflict with Iran, the US has to follow. And that creates a problem globally, really, not just in between these two countries, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's obviously important to keep in mind that the Israelis for many years have been targeting Iranians and Iranian interests in Syria. Probably, I don't know the exact count, but thousands, if not tens of thousands of times over the past decade or so, the Israelis have carried out these operations in Syria that are aimed at you know, taking a punch at sort of Iran's hand inside Syria. And then this attack, though, on Iran's diplomatic mission was something that I think the Iranians felt crossed the line. And with the Islamic Republic trying to assert itself as a powerful country in the region, as a muscular actor in the region, they didn't want to set a precedent that Israel could do something like that and just get away with it because Iran would be too scared to respond. That being said, you know, the Iranians, they sent the drones at a very slow speed. They announced in advance they were doing it. They purposefully avoided hitting civilian areas in Israel. The attack was very calibrated, very choreographed. It was really much more about doing something flashy rather than doing something that would spill blood or create serious destruction of infrastructure or property inside Israel. But the point is, in the Middle East, all the Arab states are unwilling to be confrontational toward Israel. And that even really includes Syria, too, historically a part of Iran's so-called axis of resistance. The Arab states are too intimidated to ever confront Israel. And they, of course, have their own interests in maintaining good relations with the U.S., at least many of the Arab states do. But the Arab publics by and large, want their governments to be more confrontational toward Israel. So the fact that Iran took this unprecedented action, I think, was also intended to sort of gain, to help Iran have more street cred kind of in the Arab world at a time in which all eyes are focused on Gaza right now.
Right. You know, on that point, I heard some analysts say Iran came out actually a little ahead of Israel on this point. They puffed their chest and launched their missiles, and no one's ever done that in I don't know how many decades. And maybe a much more quieter, what is that saying? If a tree falls in the forest, if no one hears it. Israel, if you heard IDF say so publicly, during that pause that they took to respond, clearly there was indecision or some conflict within the cabinet of Netanyahu. There was discussion. I think I heard the IDF say, we're going to try to build a coalition of Sunni countries against Israel, against Iran. And by the way, every time I say Iran, I'm sensitive to this. I mean the Islamic Republic, not the good people of Iran. I say it for brevity, but people correct me sometimes on this program. But that didn't happen. I mean, there were some countries that helped with downing of those drones, but there was no coalition to speak of.
Yeah, no, that's a very important point you make. Israel definitely was able to make those interceptions, but there was also help they received from the US, UK, France, and also Jordan. And this actually created quite a bit of, I'm saying crisis goes a little too far, but it created some political friction in Jordan because as the Iranian drones were flying through Jordanian airspace, Jordanian military intercepted them. And there were some in Israel and in the United States who interpreted that, or at least wanted to depict that as Jordan coming to the defense of Israel. But the Jordanian authorities were very keen to emphasize that this is actually about Jordan asserting its sovereign rights and protecting its own interests, and that this was not done to come to the defense of Israel. And what we see from Jordan, as well as the Arab states of the Gulf Cooperation Council, is a real desire to see to it that if there ever is a full-blown military conflict between Iran and Israel, that they will just simply stay out of it. They are terrified about they're terrified about the idea of getting caught in the crossfire of any conflict between the Iranians and Israelis. They don't want to be aligning with Iran against Israel, nor vice versa with Israel against Iran. They are scared about becoming collateral damage in such a conflict. So what these countries want is de-escalation, but if de-escalation can't happen and there is going to be some sort of a war like this, they just want to have the damage to their countries be as minimal as possible. But again, there are these dynamics we have to consider with so many citizens of these Arab countries that are so angry at Israel. Any moves that their governments take, which are seen as coming to the defense of Israel, can create a tremendous amount of political and societal friction within those countries. So these are definitely some very delicate issues here.
Right. And on that societal friction, another not often reported dynamic, as you mentioned, is that Egypt and other Sunni Arab countries are not opening their borders to the Palestinian people. And when the world is watching this and they're watching, the population movements in Gaza and the bombing and collateral damage, people ask why, and I know the answer, but I wanted to kind of hear you explain it. Why are these Arab countries not opening their borders to Palestinians, refugees?
Yeah, so first of all, in the case of Egypt, we need to be clear about something. Egypt is not against taking in refugees. There are, I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but I think there's something like 8 to 10 million refugees currently in Egypt. They're from Sudan, Yemen, Syria, Libya, other countries in Africa. So I just stress that over the years, the Egyptians have taken in many, many refugees, and it's not like the government has a policy against helping displaced people from other countries. So why are they not allowing Gazans in any significant number to enter Egypt? Well, this has to do with some very sensitive political dynamics. Throughout the whole Arab world, there are powerful emotions that are felt when thinking about the events of 1947, 1948. In Arabic, this is called the Nakba, meaning the catastrophe. This was when Israel ethnically cleansed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians at gunpoint, and they fled into neighboring Arab countries. It's quite clear that the leadership in Israel today is trying to kick Palestinians out of Palestinian territories, and certainly not letting them into Israel proper, but they want to see them go to other Arab countries. And the view is that Israel is trying to carry out a Nakba 2.0, if you will. If the Egyptian authorities were to allow all of these Palestinians into Egypt and perhaps take some money from the United States or from Europe to cover costs of bringing in these refugees, there would be a lot of rage on the part of Egyptians as well as Arabs throughout the wider region, who would see the Egyptian regime as being very complicit with this Nakba 2.0 agenda. And there's also a belief that Israel's aim, maybe after this war in Gaza wraps up, would be to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from the West Bank into Jordan. So this is why the Egyptian and Jordanian governments have been very firm, very rigid when they say that our policy is we're not taking in Palestinian refugees. Palestinians belong in Palestine, and we need to bring this war to an end. And the solution to this conflict is not kicking out, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of Palestinians into neighboring Arab countries. We're not going to repeat we're not going to have another 1948, if you will. And again, I just stress that there are really powerful emotions felt in Egypt and also in Jordan. We can look at public opinion polls to confirm this. We can look at the protests that have been taking place in Egyptian and Jordanian cities since October 2023. And it's very clear that if those governments were to be seen from the perspective of their own citizens as facilitators of a Nakba 2.0, that could trigger a tremendous amount of social unrest at home, to the point where the regime's stability and perhaps even survival could come into question.
Right. Thank you for that explanation. And I just wanted to mention that all of this was triggered by the events of October 7, whether, as the UN Secretary General said, happened in a vacuum or not. Tragic loss of life of innocent Jewish civilians, and still to this day, Jewish hostages, American hostages, being held by Hamas. So there's that side of it, and there's also the side of it that we just kind of talked about, which is the rippling effects of that conflict in Gaza and what it's doing to the region. And on that strong emotions point, I have to end there, because that is global. As you see on U.S. campuses all over this country. So we're not going to be able to solve it today, but thank you so much, Giorgio Cafiero, for joining us again. We learned a lot, and please come back and see us soon.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much.
Thank you.